Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. Yesterday's shooting suspect that ended up wounding two National Guard members, this gentleman pictured right here alongside this young lady, had been sworn in less than 24 hours before they were attacked by an Afghan. And now it is confirmed the man used to be a CIA asset. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. And I also need to mention that today's episode is being sponsored by Rocket Money. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are looking for a way to actually save money simply by canceling your unwanted subscriptions, I think you should look absolutely no further than Rocket Money. It makes your life so easy. Millions of Americans are wasting money on a daily basis with unwanted subscriptions. Well, now you have a simple way to go about take care of it. If you guys didn't know, Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and it helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. I want you guys to see and take a look just how easy this is once you get the app synced up. It literally shows you what your subscriptions are. You figure out what it is that you need, and you just click the cancel button, and it tells you how much money you end up saving. How about frickin' that? I absolutely love it. The dashboard lays out your total financial picture, including billing dates and pay dates in ways that are easier to digest, and you can automatically create custom budgets based on your past spending. Rocket Money has saved users $2.5 billion, including over $880 million in canceled subscriptions alone. Their 10 million members save up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Rob. That's rocketmoney.com/Rob. rocketmoney.com/Rob. It's also linked down in the description below. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of this episode and start talking about what it is you came here to learn about. So what actually went down yesterday? Well, yesterday you had the two National Guard members that were standing on the corner as per multiple reports about the situation. The man literally walked up and just shot them at point blank range. Now, something that wasn't widely reported on yesterday was how he ended up getting taken down. What actually ended up happening was a major that was in the area was patrolling, walking around. He was not armed. The two National Guard members standing outside the metro station were armed. They didn't see it coming. They got ambushed by the guy from very close distance. Now, those members are in critical condition. Okay, I need to make sure I put that out there. Yesterday, I believe it was the governor of West Virginia had came out and stated that they had passed away. It turns out that's not true. He got bad information and ended up putting out prematurely. They both went through extensive surgery and they're doing okay. Now, after they were shot, there was a major that heard the gunshots and they came rushing into the area. The suspect that actually did the shooting, the terrorist that came here from Afghanistan in 2021 underneath Joe Biden, then turned the firearm on the major. Now he's shooting a revolver. He had to go overload it. The major ended up taking cover behind a vehicle, pulling out his pocket knife, and then charged the suspect and stabbed him in the freaking forehead multiple times until another National Guard member ended up showing up and shooting the suspect. And the reports are once in the leg and once in the butt. So that ended up happening just in that way. Before we get into his affiliations with the terror networks and with the CIA, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play for you guys a couple updates of what our government's stating about this gentleman and the charges that he is about to face.
That are appropriate right now are 3 counts of assault with intent to kill while armed, a violation of DC Code 22-401 and DC Code 22-4502. He will also be charged with possession of a firearm during a crime of violence. He faces 15 years under the assault with the intent to kill. We intend to continue monitoring what the charges will be, depending upon the well-being of the guardsmen. We are praying that they survive and that the highest charge will not have to be murder in the first degree. But make no mistake, if they do not, that will certainly be the charge, murder in the first degree. The Department of Justice under Attorney General.
They are going to seek the death penalty if either of these two National Guard members die. Now, the reason it's 3 charges of assault, not 2, is because of the 2 National Guard members that are in the hospital, plus the major, likely, or that's what I'm assuming in this case, the major that ended up getting assaulted by the guy who he then went over and stabbed in the head. You guys said, I thought the guard was armed. They were carrying M16s in 92 after Hurricane. Yeah, no, they had sidearms on them. They were armed. And you have to understand that, one, you had 2 very junior National Guard members. All right. There's only so much that you can react to and how fast. I just told you that another National Guard member ended up shooting them. Right. So you have to take this into account when you're looking at the situation of what's going on. Just because you're standing there, the human body takes like at least 4 to 5 seconds to realize that they're actually getting shot at and to react. All right. It's not something that's simple. Everybody thinks that, like carrying a gun is automatically going to somehow make you safe. And that's just simply not the case. That's why you see law enforcement officers in America preemptively draw their pistol a bunch. And now people get very upset about it, but it's something that like ends up happening. Okay. There was a post that I ended up making yesterday where I was talking about what actually took place underneath the Biden administration and why the vetting process needs to happen and be more secure. I talked to you guys last week. Trump on Friday had authorized, I believe it's DOS, to actually go in and start digging through all the visas between 21 and 22 and start looking at those Afghan immigrants that came here during that botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. And our government back then lied to us about how safe and secure it was. I know this from my own personal interviews with people that were on the ground at HKIA during the withdrawal from Afghanistan that were actually screening the paperwork and allowing these Afghans to come in their country. And it was an absolute, crap show for lack of better words. Back then, Jen Psaki, spokesperson over at the White House, assured us that these people were good to go.
You've talked about this a little bit on this end as well, but there are, of course, concerns among lawmakers, experts who've tracked this. We're saying previous arrivals of large numbers of refugees from different parts of the world, inevitably there may be a small handful who are eventually deemed a security risk of some kind. What reassurances can you make about the screening process and the attempts to make sure that somebody like that doesn't make his or her way here?
I can absolutely assure you that no one is coming into the United States of America who has not been through a thorough screening and background check process. And there are many individuals, as you noted, who have not been through that process, and they have gone to lily pad countries as that process has been completed. It doesn't mean that that's because there is a flag. It means they have not completed their paperwork, and we were working to save tens of thousands of people. Hence, we evacuated them to these third countries.
Yeah. So there you go. Spokesperson for the White House, Jen Psaki, reassures the American people back then that everybody that they're screening, everybody that they allowed in was 100% safe. And that's just simply not the case. We know that because of the paperwork that had to do with the 2 individuals that were charged in Oklahoma for plotting a terror attack last year. They ended up getting arrested by the FBI for a shooting that they planned on taking place on Election Day in November. Now, that luckily that ended up getting foiled, but you look through that paperwork and you look into those men, there is reporting that they ended up coming into the United States. One of them came into the United States without the appropriate paperwork. But once he was here, they were like, well, what do we do? I guess we let him in and give him a visa. And then that turned out to be, not such a good thing. Obviously it turned out very, very bad. Again, I talked about this yesterday and I had ended up bringing it up. And I want to, before I get into this, tell you like kind of my take on whether or not we should be allowing these Afghans to come to the country. Now, as a former Special Forces soldier, as somebody that actually signed his name to a dotted line and vouched for some of these men that came in here to the United States of America, I felt one of the biggest personal responsibilities to make sure that the men that were coming to America were safe. I would not have signed my name to a piece of paper and said, yes, they can come to this country unless I felt safe letting them sleep in my own home with my children there. And I 100% believe that. A couple of years ago, I ended up meeting, 2 years ago, I ended up meeting up with like 2 of them, like very good guys. It's just not something that I think most Americans can grasp. We fought side by side with these guys and everything. And every American that signed their name to the dotted line for this SIV paperwork wanted to make sure that they were solid and good to go. right? And unless there's like a consensus among us that, yeah, they're a good dude, I'm going to vouch for them, I'm going to let them come in. Unless there's that consensus, we ain't doing it, man. So here's the other thing that I kind of have going into it. I remember after 9/11, we ended up having people getting shot. We ended up having people get mugged. We ended up having people get harassed because people thought they were Arabs, but sometimes they were Sikhs. They were from like actual country of India. And we had people getting bullied all over. So on this Thanksgiving Day, you know, before I get into the meat and potatoes of this, I want you guys to take that into account. Trump actually had some pretty harsh words for where this guy ended up coming out from. All right.
I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about. Nobody knew who was coming in. Nobody knew anything about it. His status was extended under legislation signed by President Biden, a disastrous president, the worst in the history of our country. This attack under...
Now, Trump isn't lying here. All right. We didn't know who was coming in. And I know that because I've interviewed the men who were on the ground during those days who were responsible for screening the paperwork at the gate. And they had said that they received little to no training on what paperwork to be looking for. A lot of it was in foreign languages, so they couldn't confirm. Talking with some of these guys, they would tell me that you had people that would show up with like photocopies that they would take and print it off. And then eventually you would have guys from the Department of State come up and say, hey, no longer accept this paperwork. At one point, I believe I got told that they got told it doesn't matter about the paperwork, just get people in here. We got told all sorts of ridiculous stuff. And so saying, you know, having the White House state with Jen Psaki back in the day that all of these people are very well vetted, ladies and gentlemen, that's simply not true. They did go through a vetting process, and a lot of them did have appropriate paperwork, but a lot of them didn't. I believe it was said that over 10,000 of them that were let into the United States of America, I believe this was reported on like the Sean Ryan show, over 10,000 of them that were let into the United States of America weren't properly screened and had connections to ISIS-K and Pakistani Taliban. Like it's just something that we know. And so this was discovered, and yet it was kind of like brushed and passed off. Now I want to get into the shooting suspect himself, because that within itself is, I think, what everybody's kind of curious about. Like how did this guy end up, you know, making it in here to this country? And that is a question that everybody should be asking. Like, where did he come from? How did he get here? Why did it happen? All right, well, let's talk about that. Sarah Adams ended up reporting on this. You guys don't know, she's a former CIA officer and has some connections. And this was actually not the bulk of what she said here was confirmed, but a lot of this was confirmed by the government. We now know that this guy was a trained CIA asset. But the interesting part about it was he allegedly only did it for the first couple, for 10 years. And I believe she actually reports and says that he went through the training back in 2007. Here you go. His agency training in 2007 took place at the CIA's Eagle Base near Des Sables district in Kabul province. So if he was doing this work for 10 years, starting in 2007, that means he completed it in 2017. Now, for those of you that don't know what was going on in Afghanistan at that time, we had a huge fight going on against ISIS-K. Over in Nangarhar province, we had a bunch of ISIS fighters that were pouring in from around the world. I remember hearing over 4 different, I kid you not, more than 4 different languages over the ISIS radios at one time. I mean, these guys were coming in from all over the place. Thousands of them shoved up there in those mountains, and we were going after them. So if this guy got out in 2017, and we were in a heavy engagement with ISIS in 2017, and he didn't leave the country until September of 2021. That is a freaking, 4-year window with this guy doing God only knows what, that we didn't have eyes on him. Where he could have been radicalized, where he could have been fighting along ISIS, he could have been doing all sorts of different things. Now, the other thing that is very important for you guys to note is he couldn't have been doing any of that whatsoever. And I want to make this perfectly clear. Yes, trained CIA asset. Yes, worked side by side along U.S. Special Forces. Was out there going around on the ground, putting bullets in bad guys for years. Now, when we talk about this and we kind of like go over it, right, and we start discussing it, there's something else that you need to understand about this withdrawal. I don't know how many people that I've spoken to that are Afghans that ended up coming into the United States of America and ended up leaving their families behind, or for whatever reason, they couldn't get their families out. Now, this guy is married and he's got kids, but he also had multiple family members left behind inside of Afghanistan. And the Taliban was able to go over and get paperwork on all of these guys. A lot of that paperwork wasn't completely and totally destroyed. A lot of those hard drives were. You guys have seen like tons of this stuff that ended up getting left behind because of how quickly that withdrawal was ordered to take place and how poorly planned it was. The Taliban ended up going and grabbing that paperwork and capitalizing on it and started tracking and hunting down family members. And a lot of them had to go into hiding. Now, it is possible that they got a hold of this suspect's family over inside of Afghanistan because 5 months ago, this man's family reports that he just went missing. That nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew what happened to him. He was from Washington State. I see you guys saying he was married with 5 kids. You're absolutely correct. So how did he make it all the way over to Washington, D.C. with a revolver in his hand? Very good question. But for 5 months prior to the shooting, this guy was missing. He was gone. Nobody in his family had heard from him. Nobody's really answering phones. None of that crap. Can we go through the math if he's 29? Oh, see, you're assuming things like you're in America and that an asset for some reason has to be of a particular age, right? Don't assume that, right? You're talking about a foreign country working side by side with people and things are completely and totally different. So I don't know how else to tell you that. And that's as in depth as I'm going to go into that. All right. But if you're looking at it from that angle, I'm telling you, you're chasing down the wrong rabbit hole. Now, that leads to a very serious complication when your family members get left behind. This is something that the Taliban would do quite often, where they would take people's families and they would torture them, they'd kill them, they would threaten to kill, they would rape, they would do all sorts of nasty things in order to get people to conduct terror attacks. So some of the people, suicide bombers, active shooters, things like that we'd see take place over there were not necessarily radicalized, but they were forced by a terrorist organization, sometimes Al-Qaeda, sometimes the Taliban, sometimes ISIS. It just depends, right? But they're forced by that different terror organization because their family members are taken captive and they're under duress. And they would rather kill themselves in a suicide bombing, in a shooting, in something like that before their family members, the worst of the worst, ends up happening to them. So that is possible that this guy's family back in Afghanistan ended up getting like captured, tortured, or that even here in the United States, because of the amount of people that were let into this country, it is possible. Like I told you, over 10,000 people have been reported with connections to ISIS and the Taliban here in America. So it is possible that the Taliban back in Afghanistan ended up getting a hold of the information, getting a hold of paperwork, discovering who this guy is, and here in America, putting his life under threat and forced him to go conduct that attack. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Now, it's not okay, and it doesn't make it okay. Not even remotely close if that's what ended up taking place. But the FBI has got a lot of digging to do into all of this stuff to kind of get to the root of it and what actually happened with this guy. Yeah.
Suspect granted asylum, and if so, when did that happen? Under which administration? And did authorities miss any signs, either in the asylum process or even back when he reportedly worked for the CIA? If you could talk about that.
Well, you miss all the signs when you do absolutely zero vetting. And that's exactly what happened in this case. When you, in the prior administration, made the decision to allow thousands of people into this country without doing a single piece of background checking or vetting, that's how you miss every single sign. And Secretary Kristi Noem has put out details specifically related to your other questions, so I'll let that speak for themselves.
Specificity of when he was granted asylum.
So, again, when I tell you that the guy likely ended up getting out of his country service in Afghanistan back in like 2017 timeframe, that does leave 4 years for lots of stuff to take place. And back then, not going to lie to you, ISIS was a huge problem. And we've had ISIS-inspired terror attacks here in the United States by Afghan immigrants that came over during that time. So we can't sit here and pretend like that's not an issue, because it absolutely is an issue. But at the same time, I want to make sure that you guys understand that. Now, Sarah went very in depth with her reporting, talking about everything with that guy. And I think a lot of focus has been kind of put, on this gentleman himself. Donald Trump, actually, I ended up bringing up and showing you like a little short statement, but he ended up giving a 5 minute speech. And we're not going to listen to all of it. But things are about to change here in the United States of America because of this. Last week, he said that they were going to go after and they were going to go and they were going to look through those visas and everything else. And I see people in the comment section saying, yes, I agree with you, that it is possible that either of those two scenarios could have taken place, or it's possible that he was radicalized here in the United States of America. Who knows? At this point, that's what the Bureau is for. Now, people are drawing to conclusions right now before we even get into this and bringing up different conspiracy theories. Christian Wurzek says, I wouldn't trust the FBI with fifth grade homework. I would. I mean, for the love of God, they stopped that terror attack last year on Election Day. Thank God they did, right? We also had multiple busts over inside of, we had a bust over inside of Dearborn just a couple of weeks ago. And they were going up to conduct another one. Who do you think is gathering this intel and actually putting those and drawing those dots together? That's the Bureau, man. So you might not like them, but have you take them away? I mean, hell, they're better than anything else that we have. And they do have a decent rate of catching these guys. Pat Loud says, could also be possible he thought he might get sent back and inevitably get taken out by the Taliban. Regardless, it doesn't make it right. It is possible, Pat. It is possible that he thought he could go back, but I'll tell you, it's highly improbable to me that that was what he was thinking and why he'd go over and attack the National Guard. And I say that because these guys actually have a great love for the United States of America and have a great hatred for radical Islam. At least the ones that I worked with did. And so for him just to go up and shoot two National Guard soldiers, it's kind of odd. Very, very odd. So there's a motive and a driver behind it, if you ask me. That is a political statement. Yeah, it's attempted murder at this point, unless they die, and then it is murder. But right now it's attempted murder on these guys, and it's pushing a political point. And you look at the times at which all of these things occurred, and that's what's sparking these conspiracy theories. We have a huge issue with immigration in this country, illegal immigration in this country. And we have a huge issue with people trying to protect the illegal immigrants, along with violence in our cities. And so one of the main things that's being pushed so far right now is the National Guard going into cities and how that's an illegal act. You don't think it's a little bit odd? I think it's odd that this attack ends up taking place, a week after Trump ends up stating that. It's also about a week after he ends up designating the Muslim Brotherhood a terror organization or chapters thereof, directing the Secretary of State to look in, take 30 days, designate them properly, everything else. So there is a lot of different things that are going on that very well could make this thing inspired. And if you don't think the Muslim Brotherhood is somehow attached to the Taliban, through different you're wrong. They're attached to all sorts of different crap, and they're attached here in the United States of America. And so that's incumbent on us to also look at that. We had two major events take place last week that would have affected, foreign terror organizations. One, deporting, people that were not properly vetted here in the United States. And two, designating Muslim Brotherhood foreign terror organization. Those are two very big motivating factors. But I also want you to understand that when they do things, when they're looking at further dividing our country, when they're looking at causing problems, they look at pushing on an already, vulnerability in the United States. So they're not going to waste a good attack on something that they don't think they need to do. And that vulnerability here in the United States is 100% the political situation of the National Guard. Those guys were chosen for a reason. A lot of people are probably looking at that and saying, you know what, this guy fighting in Afghanistan, of course he's going to kill American soldiers because it's payback, it's retribution. False statement. This guy's fighting alongside American soldiers, killing members of the Taliban, killing some of the worst with the units that he was with. And they are very well vetted within all of those different processes. So something had to have occurred afterwards. We don't know what that something is, but it occurred afterwards. And again, people are looking at and they're stating because this man was a CIA asset at one point, therefore the CIA must have directed this attack, that people inside of America are going to activate that CIA cells in order to cause further divide. Gordon says Slotkin is a Brennan acolyte. Enough said. Yeah, I don't like Slotkin, and I don't like the things she said. She came out and alleged that National Guard members might just start randomly shooting inside cities, at American citizens. That's not okay. That's pretty messed up. And then we had that happen. But him being a CIA asset are causing people to spin out. I mean, a lot of them. Alex Jones made a very long post about it. Lots of people are, and they're assuming that the Central Intelligence Agency activated a sleeper cell here in the United States because they don't like the direction that the country is going in order to cause turmoil and all of this other crap. And I'll tell you that the most plausible or most likely course of action is either A, radicalization, or B, he was forced to do it out of duress against his family, and several other things, right? That is the most common course of action that ends up taking place when we would have green on blue. So we called them green on blue incidents over inside of Afghanistan, right? Where our partner force would kill Americans. And one of those cases, very famous, there was an officer that was calling home and FaceTiming. It wasn't FaceTime back then. I think it was like a Yahoo Messenger. So I forget, but Skype, whatever. But he's essentially FaceTiming with his wife when somebody from the partner force walked in and blew the back of his head off. Why do these things occur? And I will tell you that the vast majority of those things occur over there because of the duress portion. Whenever we had somebody get flipped, there was always like an element of duress that would go into it. The other thing that would go into it, which I would completely and totally rule out at this point, all right, is family members being killed. Now, something else that I ended up seeing reported by Sarah Adams, which is important to note, okay? It's, I believe, the suspect's brother-in-law, if I remember right. This is him up on the screen. He was like a major recruiter for ISIS, and he ended up getting killed right around the same time that, just right around the same time that he ended up getting out. So if his brother-in-law got killed in, the fight, it was in 2022. 2022. I want to make sure I get this right. It wasn't the time he got out. I think it was in 2022 that this guy got killed. 2022. So right around the time he came over. 2022. He got killed in 2022. So just after he came over. About a year. Less than, actually. So that is possible that because his brother-in-law was killed fighting ISIS, but you got to remember in 2022, U.S. forces were not in Afghanistan fighting ISIS. The Taliban was. And now they're all buddies and stuff. They ended up kumbaya-ing. So that, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't even pass muster for a possible motive. The U.S. ended up killing him. Christian says, do you think when he came here, the threat level was low? I understand that we have a lot of UN-vetted immigrants here, but was this the situation? Did he become radicalized possibly after he arrived? It is possible, man. It is possible. But to answer your first question, do you think when he came here, the threat level was low? No, I don't. I think the threat level was very high when he ended up coming here. And I think the Bureau did a decent job of going after some of the radicals that came into this country. But they also know, and I want you to think about this. If you're infilling into a foreign country with poor intentions, and the government's kind of being generous by letting you in, they're not necessarily going to just say, okay, see you later, bye, and let you walk off. They're going to be following you around for a while. They're going to be paying attention to the different things that you're going to do. You're likely subject to electronic surveillance and all sorts of other crap here in the United States of America, right? Because they're worried about terrorism. It was a big worry back then. And so what you do is you lay low and you lead a normal life for a while. So I think the threat level was very high when he ended up coming in here. Very high. And if anything, like at that time, if you go back and you watch the videos of the Afghan withdrawal and all of the freaking stuff that was going on back then, dude, so many terrorists over there, it's insane. So many over there, it's insane. I've talked about this before to where, the difference between 2012 when I was there to 16, 17, 18 when I was there, night and day difference. Night and day difference between those time frames. The amount of support that the local nationals had for the Taliban was through the roof at that point in time. And you're talking a matter of 5 years later. Remember my last mission I went out on driving back. Nothing but Taliban flags throughout this entire district. We drove through the Taliban support area to a Taliban area in order to conduct our operation. And on the way out, nothing but Taliban flags all over the place. So I think the threat level was very, very high at the time. And I think Joe Biden did something very irresponsible. And I think the service members that were on the ground did their absolute best. And I mean, look at the Abbey Gate bombing, man. We were on our way out and ISIS was still killing U.S. service members. So yes, the threat level was very, very high for everybody that was coming into the United States of America and should have properly been screened. Should have. But I know for a fact there was people that were evac'd from that country that did not have appropriate paperwork. I know for a fact that there was people that were evac'd from that country that had photocopies of other people's paperwork. and that the United States government really has no way of vetting that stuff. And instead of saying, you know what, this is too big of a risk to the American people, we let them in, or the EU took them in, and they're scattered about. We were not even remotely prepared for it. They ended up getting thrown into our welfare system, getting scattered around the country, for crying out loud. To say that these people were well vetted is insane. They got shoved on military bases and then went through different processing. Hell, what's his name? Habitual line caresser. I'm trying to remember his dang name off the top of my head. He ended up making a post about this crap. And his experience, like during that time. The shooter in D.C. needs to be charged and his family sent back overseas. I participated in the blunder that was Operation Allies Welcome under the Biden administration. I watched them walk off the installation and was told I was being unreasonable when I said CBP should be sitting at the gate and send them back. I was then politely asked to leave the meeting. I met thousands of people who didn't want to assimilate and had no plan to it. The crap in the ground next to the Port O'John's that we spent tens of thousands of dollars to keep clean. They stole from each other and fashioned weapons. They gave fake names every time they showed up for processing. I watched my nation hemorrhage $1 million a week on these people who didn't give a crap and just wanted a free ride. I begged Brigadier General Harrison and Command Sergeant Major Calvo to raise the red flag that this isn't effective. I was told to shut up in color. F those Fs we brought here. Some are good, no lie, but protect yourself and your family from the rest and stay strapped. He lays out that you had people, like I said, that were brought on these bases for processing, and they sat there, some of them for months, many, many months, and eventually would just walk off. And CBP wasn't there. Nobody would arrest them. That's his statement. And when he ended up bringing it up and it was a problem, shut up in color, man. Why? Because it was the Biden administration. So you can't sit here and question and say that all of these people are well vetted. Jen Psaki absolutely lied to the American people. The Biden administration absolutely lied to the American people. And we had no idea who was being brought in. That is the serious thing that I'm glad is finally being brought to light about all of this. All of it. Now, they are going to dig into this guy's background. They're going to dig into his connections. Like, technical surveillance is going to be huge on this to figure out what the hell was going on leading up to, his travels. And I'm sure we're going to get a full breakdown of everything that, it's going to happen. But be patient with it, because likely, if it is what I think it is, there is a much larger cell at play here. And they're also in control of more people than you realize. And if they're able to take that guy, a former CIA asset, and force him to go over and conduct that attack, ladies and gentlemen, how easy do you think it is to flip some of the Afghans that had no affiliation with the military, the agency, anybody whatsoever, and just illegally entered the country? Jumped aboard those planes and then walked off the bases when they got here. That is the real concern you should be with, right? And that is why I now want to bring up and play for you guys what President Trump had to say about the entire situation.
My great fellow Americans, earlier today, on the eve of the Thanksgiving holiday, 2 members of the National Guard serving in Washington, D.C., were shot at point-blank range in a monstrous ambush-style attack just steps away from the White House. They had been deputized as part of the most successful public safety and national security mission in the history of our nation's capital, the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force, which has achieved an unprecedented reduction in violent crime and crimes of all type. This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror. It was a crime against our entire nation. It was a crime against humanity. The hearts of all Americans tonight are with those 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard and their families. The love of our entire country is pouring out for them, and we are lifting them up in our prayers. As we are filled with anguish and grief for those who were shot, we're also filled with righteous anger and ferocious resolve. As President of the United States, I am determined to ensure that the animal who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that, based on the best available information, The Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about. Nobody knew who was coming in. Nobody knew anything about it. His status was extended under legislation signed by President Biden.
Now, let's pause right there. It's being reported that he applied for refugee status in, I want to say it was November of 24, and that it was approved in April of 25. And people are pointing at this and now trying to declare that it's somehow Trump's fault when he had only been in office in reality less than 3 months. And so if that's the case, it takes a very long time and people are still going to, like those wheels are turning just like they were in the Biden administration until they reach further marching orders, which is why he ended up issuing that order last week. And I got a feeling that our government likely knew that something like this was taking place because the president, again, last week just actually ended up ordering that everybody go and take a look at those things. John Smith coming in, donating $10. Thank you very much. And the Kids Campus says Operation Enduring Welcome was here in Germany. Yeah, it was a big, long process. However, I don't think that's Trump's fault that his refugee status ended up getting approved because on paper, again, the guy was living in the United States and he had decent service side by side with the United States. So people that are putting that out there, I don't know. Now, some of you guys are stating, do you honestly expect us who are well-read to believe that there's not some sort of, psychological operation taking place here in the United States or insurrection by the agency or anybody else that's going to be going to this? No, that's not what I'm trying to convince you of. I'm giving everybody else more information because they're going to get indoctrinated with the possibility heavily because of conspiracy theorists, heavily indoctrinated with the possibility that this was a CIA op that ended up taking place, activating sleeper cells and all of that crap here inside of the United States. I don't believe that. Now, it could be that this gentleman maintained close relationships with somebody that he worked with in the agency that's no longer in, that has been out, and that person purported themselves to be an active agent and tried tasking him out to do other things here in the United States because they believed in everything. I do think that is a possibility. There's a million different routes here that need to get taken a look at. But to stand up and scream that because he worked for the agency, somehow this is a CIA operation, I think is ludicrous. And I think a lot of people here would absolutely agree with that. There's some of you that I will never convince, and that's fine. I never argue with people that state you will never convince me X, Y, and Z. I will talk to people, I will debate with people that have a reasonable, rational discussion. Had a great 3 hour long rational discussion last night with Paramount Tactical. Rational discussion on a lot of different events. And I don't even think we agreed on some of them, but it's rational.
Disastrous president, the worst in the history of our country. This attack underscores the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. The last administration let in 20 million unknown and unvetted foreigners from all over the world, from places that you don't want to even know about. No country can tolerate such a risk to our very survival. An example is Minnesota, where hundreds of thousands of Somalians are ripping off our country and ripping apart that once great state. Billions of dollars are lost, and gangs of Somalians come from a country that doesn't even have a government, no laws, no water, no military, no nothing, as their representatives in our country preach to us about our Constitution and how our country is no good. We're not going to put up with these kind of assaults on law and order by people who shouldn't even be in our country. We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden, and we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them. America will never bend and never yield in the face of terror.
There you go. So he is going to be reviewing all of them. The only part about this that I don't like personally is that I have friends that I know are good, honest, hardworking people that fought their butts off and love this country that we brought over here on SIVs, and that there is a chance that they could get caught up in this mess and end up being deported back to Afghanistan, and they're going to get killed. However, I am America first. I understand that our criminal justice system isn't perfect and that people have been put on death row and people have been executed by our government, federal and state governments, who have later been exonerated. And in the same way, that doesn't stop us from enforcing the law in this situation. I'll fight tooth and nail for my friends that are over here if they try to deport them, if they try to send them back to Afghanistan that I know to be justified, unless they come up and show some other paperwork that says otherwise. I'm not going to stand up for somebody that's a terrorist. That's ridiculous. But at the end of the day, if it happens, it happens. And there's nothing I can do about that, and there's nothing anybody else can do about that. And the safety of the American people as a whole, I think, is far more important. And that's something that the Biden administration got wrong. Pat Loudon says maybe Trump will think twice about the weekly Taliban payments now. I certainly hope so. We shouldn't be sending any money over there to those bastards. And even if they're threatening to attack us, we shouldn't be sending any money over there. There's no excuse for why we should be releasing any of that money back to them. Kids Campus says most of these dudes were not translators, but average dudes. We had hundreds of contractors here, along with FBI and other agencies, watching these people as they walked around freely. There you go again. There you go again. When I said it was a crap show, nobody knew what was going on. It's also unprecedented, right? So what do you do about that? What do you do? Kids Campus says the day that Trump got elected, all of those chicken coops came down the next day. Imagine that. I had no idea that they were still up, to be perfectly honest with you. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, did the man work for the agency? Yeah, he was recruited and trained by the agency. Did he fight side by side along U.S. SOF? Yes. There's photographic evidence that shows that, and we have people that have came out and stated that. So I do believe all of those things to be factual. Do we know his motives at this time? No. And there is a million different reasons that to me are far more concerning than a guy that just got radicalized and shouted Allah Akbar and shot two of our soldiers, that America needs to be worried about. And these are those types of deep thinking and critical thinking that I want you guys to be able to do over here on this channel. Ladies and gentlemen, today is Thanksgiving. If you haven't yet, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to cut this a little bit short today, but I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving and a peace, love, happiness, and God bless. I'm out of here.
And at the same time, we will not be deterred from the mission these service members were so nobly fulfilling. That is why tonight I can announce that I have directed the Department of War to mobilize an additional 500 troops to help protect our capital city. We will make America totally safe again, and we will bring the perpetrator of this barbaric attack